The hidden struggle of Michael. The faint light of dawn seeped through the curtains of Michael's room, casting long, soft shadows across the cluttered floor. Amid scattered toy cars and half-completed puzzles lay Michael himself, curled up tightly beneath a worn Superman blanket. His sister Emma peeked in, her heart aching at the sight of her little brother. The boy who once sprang out of bed, ready to tackle the day with uncontainable energy, now seemed to shrink deeper into himself each morning. At just 10 years old, Michael bore the weight of struggles no child should face. His learning disability, a mix of dyslexia and attention deficit disorder, made navigating the world of academia akin to scaling a steep, unyielding mountain. Though bright and creative, the traditional school environment failed him at every turn. Words jumbled on the page, numbers danced away before he could grasp them, and the incessant noise of a bustling classroom overwhelmed his senses. Despite his best efforts, Michael often found himself lost, left behind as his peers surged ahead. "Michael, honey, time to get up," Emma said gently, her voice barely above a whisper. She knew better than to startle him awake these days. His nightmares had worsened over the past few weeks, filled with pleas she didn't fully understand. "I'm sorry, I'll do better, and please, not again." The words haunted her, but Michael refused to explain, brushing off her concern with a forced smile that never reached his tired eyes. The morning routine unfolded in a haze of silence. Michael moved mechanically, his usual excitement about packing his lunch or picking out his favorite shirt now replaced with a quiet resignation. Emma couldn't help but notice his hands trembling slightly as he zipped up his backpack. Her protective instincts flared, but she swallowed her worries for now. Today was already hard enough without her pressing questions. By the time they reached the school parking lot, Michael's apprehension was palpable. His gaze darted between the brightly colored murals on the school walls and the door to his classroom. The cheerful paintings of smiling children and happy animals seemed like cruel mockery to him, a stark contrast to what he experienced inside those walls. As the school bell rang, Michael reluctantly shuffled toward the building. Emma watched him go, her heart twisting as she saw his small figure grow smaller and smaller, disappearing into a place that seemed to drain the light from him. A lump formed in her throat. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, and Emma was determined to uncover the truth. In the classroom, the chaos of the morning routine buzzed around Michael like static noise. Miss Clark, his teacher, stood at the front of the room, her expression already strained. She was an experienced educator with a reputation for being no-nonsense, but in recent years, her patience had thinned to a dangerous degree. The classroom environment she created was far from welcoming. For children like Michael, it was a battlefield. Michael slid into his seat, clutching his textbook tightly. The words on the pages blurred before his eyes, merging into a nonsensical jumble. He blinked hard, willing the letters to make sense, but his efforts were futile. Miss Clark's voice rose above the chatter, announcing a new lesson on multiplication. Michael's stomach churned as the numbers danced on the whiteboard. "Michael," Miss Clark's sharp voice cut through his concentration. "Can you solve this problem on the board?" Panic gripped him. He stared at the equation, his mind a blank slate. Slowly, he shook his head, mumbling an apology under his breath. Miss Clark sighed audibly, the exasperation in her tone like a dagger to Michael's already fragile self-esteem. "You need to start paying attention," she snapped. "If you can't keep up, you'll never learn anything." The room fell silent. Michael felt the eyes of his classmates boring into him. He shrank in his seat, wishing the ground would swallow him whole. Hot tears pricked his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. Crying would only make things worse. Meanwhile, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister was happening to her brother. Over the past few weeks, she had noticed subtle but alarming changes in him. The spark in his eyes when he spoke of his favorite books and hobbies was gone. His once endless stream of questions about the world had dwindled into silence. And then there were the nightmares. the gut-wrenching cries of fear that seeped through his bedroom walls. That evening, as she prepared dinner, Emma decided to confront Michael gently. She needed to know what was going on, but she didn't want to push him further into his shell. "Hey, buddy," she said, sitting beside him on the couch. Michael stared at the TV, his eyes unfocused. "How was school today?" "It was fine," he muttered, his voice devoid of emotion. Emma frowned. "Just fine. Did you learn anything exciting?" Michael hesitated, his small hands gripping the edge of the couch cushion. "No," he said flatly. After a moment, he added, "I'm tired. Can I go to bed?" Emma watched him retreat to his room, her worry deepening. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Michael's behavior than mere exhaustion. Determined to get to the bottom of it, she decided to investigate further. Later that night, Emma found herself outside Michael's room. Through the door, she could hear his muffled voice, heavy with fear. "Please don't lock me in again," he whispered. "I'll be good. I promise." The words struck Emma like a lightning bolt. She stumbled back, her mind racing. Lock him in. What did that mean? Who was doing this to him? Her protective instincts surged, and she resolved to uncover the truth, no matter how difficult or painful it might be. The following morning, Emma began her investigation. She planned to reach out to Michael's teacher, observe his classroom environment, and, if necessary, take more drastic measures. Her brother's voice echoed in her mind, fueling her determination. Michael might not have the words to ask for help, but Emma would be his voice. She would uncover the truth, protect her brother, and ensure that no child endured the same silent suffering. The fight for justice was just beginning. Behind closed doors, Emma's alarm buzzed sharply at 5:30 a.m., pulling her out of restless dreams filled with Michael's frightened voice echoing in the darkness. She sat up, her resolve firm despite the unease in her chest. Today would be different. Today, she would start piecing together the truth about what was happening to her brother. She brewed a pot of coffee and sat down at the kitchen table, a notepad and pen in front of her. She jotted down the plan she had crafted the night before. First, she would request a meeting with Miss Clark, posing as a concerned sister eager to support Michael's education. This would be her chance to assess the teacher's demeanor and approach. Then, if that didn't yield results, she would escalate her concerns to the school's administration. Lastly, if necessary, she would find a way to gather evidence, something concrete to force action if the system proved unresponsive. By the time Michael trudged into the kitchen, still rubbing the sleep from his eyes, Emma was ready. "Morning, buddy," she said, offering him a smile that she hoped masked her anxiety. "I'll walk you to school today." Michael paused, his hand hovering over the cereal box. "Why?" he asked cautiously. "No reason," Emma replied, keeping her tone light. "I just thought it'd be nice. We haven't walked together in a while." He shrugged and poured his cereal, but Emma could see the flicker of relief in his eyes. The walk to school was quiet, the crunch of gravel beneath their feet the only sound. Michael clutched his backpack tightly, his shoulders hunched as if bracing for a storm. As they approached the school gates, Emma knelt beside him. "Have a good day, okay? And if anything happens, anything at all, you tell me," she said firmly. Michael nodded but avoided her gaze, his silence speaking volumes. Later that morning, Emma found herself sitting across from Miss Clark in the teacher's cluttered office. The space was cramped, with stacks of ungraded papers teetering precariously on every surface. Miss Clark, a woman in her early 40s with sharp features and an air of impatience, looked up from her laptop, clearly annoyed by the interruption. "Miss Roberts," she said, gesturing toward a chair. "What can I do for you?" Emma settled into the chair, clasping her hands tightly in her lap. "I wanted to talk about my brother, Michael," she began. "He's been struggling a lot lately, and I'm worried he's not getting the support he needs." Miss Clark sighed, leaning back in her chair. "Michael is a sweet boy, but he does struggle to stay focused. It's difficult to give him the one-on-one attention he needs when I have 30 other students in the class. Emma nodded, trying to keep her tone neutral. I understand that. But he's been having nightmares. He's scared to come to school. I need to know if there's something happening in class that's making him feel this way. Miss Clark's expression hardened. I run a disciplined classroom, Miss Roberts. If Michael feels uncomfortable, it's likely because he's not meeting the expectations set for him. Perhaps you should focus on helping him develop better study habits at home. Emma's chest tightened, anger simmering beneath her calm exterior. I'm not here to place blame, Miss Clark. I'm here because my brother is struggling, and I need to understand why. If he needs extra help, then we need to figure out how to provide it. Miss Clark's smile was thin, her tone patronizing. I assure you, I'm doing everything I can for Michael. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a class to prepare for. Emma left the office feeling more unsettled than ever. Miss Clark's defensive demeanor and dismissive attitude only deepened her suspicions. That evening, Emma decided to take the next step. If Miss Clark wouldn't provide answers, then Emma would find them herself. She borrowed a small audio recorder from a friend and carefully tucked it into Michael's backpack, securing it in a hidden pocket. Her hands trembled as she zipped the bag shut. This is just in case, she whispered to herself. Just in case. The next morning, Emma watched Michael disappear through the school doors with the recorder tucked away, her heart pounding. She spent the day anxiously waiting for him to return, her mind racing with possibilities. When Michael finally walked through the door, his face pale and his shoulders slumped, Emma knew her decision had been the right one. After dinner, while Michael retreated to his room, Emma retrieved the recorder. She plugged it into her laptop, her hands shaking as she clicked play. At first, the sounds were mundane, the hum of chatter, the scrape of chairs. Then Miss Clark's voice pierced through the background noise. Michael, I've had enough of this. Why can't you just listen? Are you trying to make this harder for everyone else? Emma's stomach churned as she listened to the teacher berate her brother. The tone was sharp, laced with impatience and scorn. It wasn't just frustration, it was cruelty. The recording continued, each minute unraveling the new layer of Miss Clark's behavior. Emma's heart broke as she heard the muffled sound of Michael's sniffles, followed by the ominous creak of a door. You'll stay in here until you can behave, Miss Clark said coldly. Emma froze. The sound of a door closing was followed by silence, then Michael's quiet, panicked breathing. He was in the closet, locked away like a criminal. Tears streamed down Emma's face as the recording ended. She sat in stunned silence, her mind reeling. She had suspected something was wrong, but hearing the reality was worse than she could have imagined. The next morning, Emma showed the recording to her parents. Their initial disbelief quickly turned to anger as they listened. We're going to the principal, her father said, his voice shaking with rage. This has to stop. As the family sat in Principal Winter's office later that day, Emma felt a flicker of hope. But as the recording played, the principal's expression remained guarded. When it ended, he sighed deeply. This is concerning, of course, he said, steepling his fingers. But we have procedures we must follow. We'll need to conduct an investigation. Emma's mother leaned forward, her voice trembling. How long will that take? Michael can't stay in that classroom another day. I understand your frustration, Principal Winters replied. But we can't take immediate action without a thorough review. In the meantime, we'll assign additional staff to monitor the classroom. Emma left the office feeling defeated. The system was failing Michael, just as it had failed countless others before him. But she wasn't giving up. She couldn't. That night, Emma made a decision. She uploaded the recording to social media, pairing it with a heartfelt message about Michael's struggles and the broader issue of how children with learning disabilities are treated in schools. Within hours, the post went viral. Comments flooded in, expressing outrage and support. Parents shared similar stories, their collective voices creating a chorus of demand for change. The hashtag Justice for Michael began trending, and local news outlets picked up the story. As Emma watched the post's reach grow, she felt a mix of hope and fear. The truth was out there now, and there was no turning back. Whatever came next, she would face it head-on, for Michael and for every child who had ever been silenced. The firestorm ignites. The sound of Emma's phone buzzing on the nightstand jolted her awake. Blinking against the harsh glow of the screen, she saw dozens of notifications, comments, shares, and messages flooding her post. The video of Michael's teacher locking him in a closet, paired with Emma's heartfelt words, had taken on a life of its own. She scrolled through the comments, her stomach churning as she read. Some messages were supportive. "This is horrifying. I'm so sorry your family is going through this. Let us know how we can help. As a teacher, this makes me sick. Kids like Michael deserve love and support, not punishment." Others were skeptical or even cruel. "Sounds fake. Teachers have enough on their plate without dealing with spoiled kids. Maybe there's more to the story. Teachers don't just do this without a reason." Emma set the phone down, overwhelmed. While the video had drawn attention, it also exposed their family to scrutiny. She glanced across the hall to Michael's room, where he was still asleep, blissfully unaware of the firestorm brewing around him. She clenched her fists, determination coursing through her. This wasn't about her or the doubters online. It was about Michael, and every child like him who had been silenced. By the time the family sat down for breakfast, Emma's post had been picked up by a local news outlet. The anchor's voice filled the living room as the story aired. A local family alleges that a teacher at Lincoln Elementary locked a 10-year-old boy with a learning disability in a supply closet as punishment. The family has released an audio recording as evidence. The district has declined to comment but confirmed that an investigation is underway. Emma's parents exchanged worried glances, their faces pale. Michael, perched at the table with his cereal, frowned. "Why are they talking about my school?" he asked, his voice hesitant. Emma swallowed hard. "It's about you, Michael," she said gently. "We shared what happened to you so people would know it wasn't okay. Now, a lot of people want to help." Michael's eyes widened. "You told?" His voice cracked, fear flooding his expression. "Now everyone knows." Before Emma could explain, Michael pushed back his chair and ran to his room, slamming the door. Emma stood frozen, guilt washing over her. She had done this to protect him, but now it felt like she'd betrayed his trust. At school, the atmosphere had shifted. By mid-morning, reporters gathered outside the gates, their cameras trained on the entrance. Parents whispered in hushed tones as they dropped off their children, the story on everyone's lips. Miss Clark's classroom was eerily silent as students exchanged nervous glances, sensing the tension in the air. Miss Clark herself was noticeably absent. The district had placed her on administrative leave pending the investigation. In her place, a substitute teacher stood at the front of the room, her voice shaky as she introduced herself. Michael felt the weight of the stares as his classmates looked at him, their eyes filled with curiosity and pity. He slouched in his seat, wishing he could disappear. That afternoon, Emma received a call from the school board, summoning her family to an emergency meeting. As they entered the administrative building, the air was thick with tension. Principal Winters sat at the head of a long conference table, flanked by two other district officials. Their faces were grave. "We've reviewed the recording," Principal Winters began, folding his hands on the table. "There's no excuse for what Michael experienced. This behavior is unacceptable, and we are committed to addressing it." Michael's father leaned forward, his voice steady but firm. "That's a good start, but what are you going to do about it? My son has been traumatized. Other children may have been too." The principal hesitated. "We've placed Miss Clark on leave and are conducting a full investigation into her conduct. Additionally, we're reviewing our training protocols to ensure teachers are better equipped to handle diverse learning needs." Emma's mother shook her head, her voice trembling with emotion. "This isn't just about training. This is about a culture that allowed this to happen. How many other children have suffered while you turned a blind eye? The officials exchanged uneasy glances. We're committed to making systemic changes, one of them said. But these things take time. Emma clenched her fists under the table. Time wasn't a luxury Michael had. She looked at her parents, then spoke up. "We don't have time," she said, her voice firm. "Michael needs help now. Other kids need help now. If you're not willing to act quickly, we'll make sure the public keeps holding you accountable." Her words hung in the air like a challenge. Principal Winters sighed, rubbing his temples. "We'll expedite the investigation and bring in external consultants to assess our practices, but I urge you to give us a chance to address this appropriately." Outside the meeting, Emma's family was greeted by a swarm of reporters. Microphones were thrust toward them, voices overlapping as journalists peppered them with questions. "Do you feel the school is doing enough to protect Michael?" one asked. "What changes do you hope to see?" asked another. Emma's father held up his hand, his voice calm but firm. "We're focused on making sure no child experiences what Michael has gone through. The system needs to change, and we'll do everything we can to make that happen." Emma noticed Michael watching from the car, his face pressed against the window. She gave a brief statement before retreating to the car, sitting beside him. "Why are they asking about me?" Michael whispered, his voice shaky. "Because you're brave, Michael," Emma said, squeezing his hand. "You didn't deserve what happened to you, and now people are listening." As the days passed, Emma's post continued to gain traction. Disability rights advocates reached out, offering support and resources. Lawyers specializing in education law volunteered to represent the family, and activists organized rallies outside the school district office. The hashtag #JusticeForMichael became a rallying cry for systemic reform, trending nationwide. But the attention came with challenges. Trolls online accused the family of seeking fame or exaggerating the story. Reporters camped outside their home, and Emma found herself constantly fielding calls from advocacy groups and journalists. The stress weighed heavily on the family, but they leaned on one another for strength. One evening, Emma sat with Michael, helping him with a puzzle. "Do you think it's working?" he asked softly, fitting a piece into place. "What's working?" Emma asked. "All the people," he said. "Do you think they'll make the school better?" Emma smiled, her eyes misting. "I think they will, Michael, and that's because of you. You were brave enough to speak up." Michael didn't reply, but the faintest smile crossed his face. It was a small step, but for Emma, it was everything. While the district's investigation continued, Emma and her family began working with disability rights organizations to push for broader reforms. They advocated for mandatory training for teachers on supporting students with disabilities, clearer accountability measures for misconduct, and more resources for special education programs. In the meantime, Michael was assigned to a new teacher, Mrs. Roberts, whose warm, patient demeanor immediately put him at ease. For the first time in months, Michael came home smiling, excited to show Emma a drawing he'd made during art class. "It's me," he said, holding up the picture. "But I'm flying." Emma hugged him tightly, her heart swelling with pride. For the first time, she felt like they were moving forward. But the fight wasn't over yet. Unveiling the systemic failure, the sun cast long shadows across the tidy suburban streets as Emma jogged home from school, her backpack slung over one shoulder and a stack of flyers clutched in her hand. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of dry leaves and distant chimney smoke, a reminder that change was in the air, in more ways than one. The past weeks had been a whirlwind. The initial surge of media attention had subsided, but the fight was far from over. Emma and her family had become unexpected advocates, their days filled with meetings, interviews, and strategy sessions with disability rights groups. The school district had promised an investigation, but progress was slow, mired in bureaucracy and red tape. Emma pushed open the front door to find her parents sitting at the kitchen table, papers spread out before them. Michael sat nearby, coloring quietly, His face relaxed for the first time in months. The new teacher, Mrs. Roberts, had made a world of difference. Michael no longer dreaded school. Instead, he came home eager to share stories about his day. "How was the meeting?" Emma asked, dropping her backpack onto a chair. Her mother sighed, rubbing her temples. "Productive, I think. The district officials are finally acknowledging that there are systemic issues, not just with Miss Clark, but across the board." Her father nodded. "They've agreed to conduct a comprehensive audit of their special education programs. It's a start." Emma pulled out a chair and sat down. "That's good news, but we can't let them drag their feet. We need to keep the pressure on." Her father smiled wryly. "Already ahead of you. We're organizing a town hall meeting next week to give other parents a platform to share their experiences." Emma's eyes lit up. "That's perfect. The more voices we have, the harder it will be for them to ignore us." Michael looked up from his coloring. "Will I have to talk in front of everyone?" Emma reached over to tussle his hair. "Only if you want to, buddy. No pressure." He nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe I can show them my drawings instead." That evening, Emma retreated to her room to work on her latest project. She had decided to create a documentary, a short film compiling stories from students and parents about their experiences with the school system. With her camera set up, she began recording her own testimony. "Growing up, I always believed that schools were safe places," she began, her reflection steady in the camera lens. "Places where children were nurtured, supported, and encouraged to reach their full potential. But what happened to my brother, Michael, shattered that illusion." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "This isn't just about one bad teacher. It's about a system that allowed her behavior to go unchecked. A system that failed to protect the most vulnerable among us." Over the next few days, Emma interviewed other students and parents. Some stories were heartwarming tales of dedicated teachers making a difference. Others were harrowing accounts of neglect and mistreatment that echoed Michael's experience. Mrs. Alvarez, a mother of a child with autism, recounted her struggles to secure appropriate accommodations. "They kept telling me that my son just needed to try harder," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "But he was trying his best. They just didn't want to put in the effort to understand him." A high school student named Liam shared his frustration with being labeled as a troublemaker. "They never asked why I was acting out," he explained. "Turns out I have ADHD, but no one caught it until I was almost failing out." As Emma compiled these stories, a pattern emerged: a systemic failure to support students with special needs, stemming from a lack of resources, training, and, in some cases, compassion. On the night of the town hall meeting, the community center was packed. Rows of folding chairs filled the auditorium, and a low buzz of conversation filled the air. Emma stood backstage, her palms sweaty as she clutched a stack of note cards. "Are you nervous?" Michael asked, appearing beside her. "A little," she admitted, "but it's important." He nodded solemnly. "You're brave." She smiled. "I learned from the best." As the meeting began, Emma's father took the podium. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "We're here tonight because we believe that every child deserves a safe, supportive education. Unfortunately, that's not always the case in our district." He gestured to Emma, who took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Over the past few weeks, I've had the privilege of speaking with many of you about your experiences. I'd like to share some of those stories now." She dimmed the lights and played the documentary. The room fell silent as the faces of students and parents filled the screen, their voices weaving a tapestry of hope and hardship. When the lights came back up, the audience erupted into applause. One by one, people approached the microphone to share their own stories. Teachers spoke about feeling overwhelmed and underprepared to meet the diverse needs of their students. Parents recounted battles with the administration over individualized education programs, IEPs, and accommodations. Students bravely shared their struggles, their voices trembling but resolute. A sense of unity blossomed in the room. This was no longer just about Michael, it was a collective call for change. Meanwhile, the school district's audit was underway. A team of external consultants reviewed policies, interviewed staff, and observed classrooms. The preliminary findings were grim. There were insufficient resources allocated to special education, inadequate training for teachers, and a lack of oversight that allowed issues to go unaddressed. Superintendent Daniels called an emergency meeting with the school board. "We have a serious problem," he announced, sliding a thick report across the table. "If we don't act swiftly, we're looking at potential lawsuits and a loss of public trust." One board member, Mrs. Thompson, frowned as she skimmed the report. "How did it get this bad?" she asked. "Weren't there warning signs?" Daniels sighed heavily. There were complaints, but they were either dismissed or lost in the shuffle. "We failed to see the bigger picture." The board deliberated late into the night, grappling with the scope of the problem. In the end, they agreed on a series of immediate actions: mandatory training for all staff on special education needs, hiring additional special education professionals, and establishing a task force, including parents and community members, to oversee the implementation of reforms. The next morning, the district released a public statement acknowledging the failures and outlining their plan for change. Local media covered the announcement extensively, and while some remained skeptical, many saw it as a positive step forward. Emma's family watched the news broadcast together. "It's a start," her mother said cautiously. "Do you think they'll follow through?" Emma asked. Her father nodded slowly. "They have to. Too many eyes are on them now." Michael looked up from his sketchbook. "Does this mean other kids won't have to go through what I did?" Emma smiled softly. "That's the goal, Michael. We're making a difference." In the weeks that followed, tangible changes began to take shape. Teachers attended workshops on inclusive education strategies, learning how to adapt lessons to accommodate different learning styles. New resource rooms were established, equipped with specialized tools and technology to support students with various needs. Mrs. Roberts became a mentor to other teachers, sharing her successful approaches with Michael and other students. She emphasized patience, empathy, and the importance of building trust. One afternoon, Emma visited the school to check in on Michael. She found him in the library, engrossed in a book about space exploration. "Hey, astronaut," she teased. "Planning your next mission?" He grinned. "Maybe. Did you know that Neptune has 14 moons?" She feigned astonishment. 14. That's a lot of moons to keep track of." He nodded enthusiastically. "Mrs. Roberts helped me find this book. She says I can do a project on the solar system for extra credit." Emma's heart swelled. This was the Michael she remembered, curious, passionate, and full of life. As they walked home, Michael chattered excitedly about his project plans. "I want to build a model of the solar system," he said, "with planets that move around the sun and everything." "That sounds ambitious," Emma said. "Do you need any help?" He considered for a moment. "Maybe with the mechanics. I have the ideas, but I might need help making them work." "Deal," she replied. "We'll make it a team effort." At the next school board meeting, Emma and her parents were invited to provide input on the proposed reforms. They sat alongside teachers, administrators, and other parents, engaging in open dialogue about the district's future. Mrs. Thompson addressed the group. "We acknowledge that we have a lot of work to do. Your feedback is invaluable as we move forward. We want to create an environment where every student feels supported and valued." Emma raised her hand. "I think it's important to include students in this process," she said. "They can offer insights that adults might overlook." Another board member, Mr. Patel, nodded in agreement. "That's an excellent point. Perhaps we can establish a student advisory committee." The idea was met with approval, and plans were made to involve students from various grades and backgrounds in the ongoing discussions. As winter approached, the school community began to feel the positive effects of the changes. Michael's confidence continued to grow, and he became more involved in school activities. He joined the science club, and even participated in a group presentation on planetary motion. One day, Mrs. Roberts pulled Emma aside when she came to pick up Michael. "I wanted to tell you how much progress Michael has made," she said warmly. "He's a joy to have in class, and his insights often spark great discussions." Emma felt a surge of pride. "Thank you for everything you've done for him. It means the world to us." Mrs. Roberts shook her head modestly. "He's the one doing the hard work. I'm just guiding him along the way." At home, the atmosphere was lighter. Laughter filled the rooms once more, and the shadows of past hardships began to fade. Emma and Michael spent evenings working on his solar system model. The dining table transformed into a makeshift workshop cluttered with paints, wires, and foam spheres. On the night they completed the model, Michael stood back to admire their handiwork. The planets orbited smoothly around a glowing sun, each painted meticulously to reflect its unique characteristics. "We did it," he said, his eyes shining. Emma draped an arm around his shoulders. "It's incredible. You're going to impress everyone at school." He turned to her, a serious expression crossing his face. "Emma, do you think things are really changing? Not just for me, but for everyone?" She considered his question thoughtfully. "I think change takes time, but we're on the right path. People are listening now. Voices that were once ignored are being heard." He nodded slowly. "I want to help. Maybe I can talk to other kids who are struggling." Her heart swelled with affection. "You'd be great at that. Your experience can help others feel less alone." As the first snowflakes of the season drifted down, the school hosted a community event to showcase student projects and celebrate the progress made. The auditorium was transformed into a vibrant exhibition hall, filled with displays ranging from art installations to scientific experiments. Michael stood proudly beside his solar system model, explaining the mechanics to interested visitors. Emma watched from a distance, her chest tight with emotion. He had come so far. Superintendent Daniels approached them, extending a hand to Emma. "I wanted to thank you," he said sincerely. "Your family's advocacy has sparked meaningful change in our district." Emma accepted his handshake. "We're just glad to see things improving. There's still work to be done." "Agreed," he replied. "But we're committed to continuing these efforts, and I hope we can count on your ongoing involvement." "Absolutely," she said. "We all have a role to play." That evening, as the event drew to a close, Michael was called to the stage to receive a special recognition for his project. The audience erupted into applause as he accepted the certificate, his smile radiant. He stepped up to the microphone, his voice steady. "Thank you," he began. "A few months ago, I didn't think I belonged here. But with the help of my family, my teacher, and everyone who believed in me, I learned that I have a place in this school." He glanced over at Emma, who gave him an encouraging nod. "I hope that every kid who feels different or left out knows that they matter too. We all have something to share." The applause was thunderous. As Michael left the stage, he was met with hugs and congratulations from classmates and teachers alike. Walking home under a sky full of stars, Michael looked up thoughtfully. "Do you think there's life on other planets?" he asked. Emma laughed softly. "Always the big questions with you." "It's possible. The universe is a big place." He grinned. "Maybe they're looking up at us, wondering the same thing." "Maybe," she agreed. They walked in comfortable silence for a while before Michael spoke again. "I'm glad we did all this," he said, "even though it was hard." Emma nodded. "Me too, and I'm proud of you." He looked at her, his eyes earnest. "I couldn't have done it without you." She wrapped an arm around his shoulders. "We're a team, remember?" As they reached their house, the warm glow from the windows beckoning them inside, Emma felt a profound sense of gratitude. The journey had been challenging, filled with obstacles and heartache, but it had also forged unbreakable bonds and ignited a passion for advocacy that she knew would guide them both into the future. The fight wasn't over, but they were no longer alone. Together, they had sparked a movement, one that would continue to grow and inspire others to stand up for what was right. Building bridges and breaking barriers. The winter morning was crisp, the ground dusted with a fresh layer of snow that crunched under Emma's boots as she walked Michael to school. The past few weeks had felt like a whirlwind, but for the first time in what felt like forever, there was a sense of stability and hope. Michael held her hand loosely, swinging his arm as he chatted about his solar system project. "Mrs. Roberts said she wants to put it in the school's display case," he said, his voice filled with pride. "So everyone can see it." Emma grinned. "That's amazing, Michael. You worked so hard on it. You deserve to show it off." Michael nodded, then fell silent for a moment. "Do you think Mrs. Roberts will stay my teacher forever?" Emma's heart ached at the vulnerability in his voice. "I hope so, buddy. But even if she doesn't, we'll make sure you always have teachers who support you, okay?" He nodded again, squeezing her hand. "Okay." As they approached the school gates, Emma noticed a new banner hanging above the entrance. "We all belong. Building an inclusive future." The words filled her with a renewed sense of purpose. The district had started to embrace change, but there was still so much work to be done. Inside the school, the changes were becoming tangible. The classrooms were equipped with new learning tools tailored to different needs: speech-to-text software for students with dyslexia, sensory kits for those with autism, and quiet spaces for anyone who needed a moment to reset. Teachers had undergone extensive training on inclusive education, learning strategies to better support students like Michael. Emma had been invited to sit in on one of these training sessions. The room was filled with teachers and staff, their expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism as the instructor began. "Inclusion isn't just about making accommodations," the instructor explained. "It's about creating an environment where every student feels valued and capable of succeeding." Emma watched as the teachers engaged in role-playing exercises, simulating what it might feel like to navigate school with various disabilities. Some struggled to complete tasks while wearing vision-blurring goggles, while others attempted to write with their non-dominant hand to mimic fine motor challenges. By the end of the session, the mood in the room had shifted. Emma overheard one teacher say, "I never realized how much we take for granted. I need to rethink how I approach my lesson plans." The progress was encouraging, but Emma knew that changing attitudes and practices was only part of the solution. The district also needed to address deeper issues, like underfunding and the stigma surrounding special education. At home, the family continued to advocate for broader systemic reforms. Emma's parents spent hours drafting proposals for the school board, outlining policies to improve accountability and ensure that every child received the support they needed. They worked closely with disability rights groups, using Michael's story as a catalyst to push for change at the state level. One evening, as Emma reviewed a draft proposal, Michael wandered into the living room with his sketchbook. "What are you working on?" he asked, climbing onto the couch beside her. "We're writing about how schools can do better for kids like you," she said, showing him the document. "It's called an action plan." Michael tilted his head thoughtfully. "Can I help?" Emma smiled. "Of course. What do you think schools should do?" He tapped his pencil against his chin, then began to draw. A few minutes later, he held up the page. It was a simple picture of a classroom, but with one key difference. The teacher was standing in the middle, surrounded by students working together in small groups, rather than standing at the front lecturing. "I think kids should help each other," Michael said, "like how Mrs. Roberts lets us work in teams. It's easier that way." Emma looked at the drawing, her heart swelling with pride. "That's a great idea, Michael. We'll include it." Meanwhile, the town hall meetings had grown into a regular forum for parents, students, and educators to collaborate on solutions. Emma often spoke at these gatherings, sharing updates on the district's progress and encouraging others to get involved. At one meeting, a mother stood up, her voice trembling as she spoke. "My son has autism, and for years I felt like I was fighting this battle alone. But seeing all of you here gives me hope. Thank you for making me feel like I'm not invisible." Her words resonated deeply with Emma. The fight for inclusion wasn't just about policy. It was about building a community where every voice mattered. As winter turned to spring, the school district unveiled its new strategic plan for inclusive education. The plan included increased funding for special education programs, mandatory annual training for staff, and the establishment of a student advisory council to provide ongoing feedback. Emma and her family were invited to attend the announcement ceremony. The auditorium was packed with students, parents, and educators, all eager to hear the district's vision for the future. Superintendent Daniels took the stage, his tone somber but hopeful. "Today marks the beginning of a new chapter for our schools," he said. "We acknowledge the mistakes of the past, but we are committed to creating a brighter future for every student. This plan is just the first step." As the audience applauded, Emma felt a surge of pride. Their efforts were making a difference, not just for Michael, but for countless others. Michael continued to thrive under Mrs. Roberts' guidance. He excelled in his science project and even joined the school's drama club, where he discovered a love for storytelling. At home, he often performed skits for the family, his confidence growing with each new performance. One evening, after a particularly animated rendition of a story about astronauts, Michael turned to Emma. "Do you think I could be a teacher someday?" Emma smiled, pulling him into a hug. "You can be anything you want, Michael, and you'd make an amazing teacher." He grinned. "I'd want to be like Mrs. Roberts. She listens." As the school year drew to a close, the district held an open house to showcase the progress made through the new initiatives. Michael's solar system model was front and center in the display case, a symbol of resilience and creativity. Parents and students wandered through the halls, marveling at the changes. One parent approached Emma, her eyes brimming with gratitude. "Thank you for everything you've done," she said. "Because of you, my daughter is finally getting the support she needs." Emma felt a lump in her throat as she nodded. "It wasn't just me," she said. "It was all of us coming together." That night, as the family gathered around the dinner table, Emma looked at Michael, who was animatedly describing his plans for the summer. She thought back to the scared, withdrawn boy who had once dreaded going to school. He was still the same Michael, but now he was surrounded by a support system that allowed him to shine. The road ahead would still have its challenges, but Emma knew they were ready to face them. Together, they had sparked a movement, one that was breaking barriers and building bridges for a more inclusive future. A legacy of change. The summer sun rose early, casting its golden light through the windows of the Roberts home. Emma sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by notebooks, printouts, and her laptop. Her focus was unshakable as she pieced together the final elements of a presentation she would deliver at an education reform conference in the state capital. This wasn't just about Michael anymore. Over the past months, Emma and her family's advocacy had transformed into a movement that reached far beyond their town. Teachers, parents, and students from other districts and even neighboring states had reached out, sharing their stories and seeking guidance. Emma had become a key voice in the fight for inclusive education, and her upcoming speech was an opportunity to amplify their collective demands for change. Michael wandered into the kitchen, still rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "Why are you working so early?" he asked, climbing onto the chair beside her. "I'm getting ready for a big presentation," Emma replied, showing him her slides. "I'm going to tell people about what we've done here so they can make schools better everywhere." Michael studied the slides, his brow furrowing. "Do you think they'll listen?" Emma smiled. "I think they will. And if they don't, we'll keep making noise until they do." Later that day, Emma joined her family at the school for the unveiling of the district's first inclusive education center. The center, located in a refurbished wing of the school, was a testament to what the community had accomplished. It was designed as a hub for students with special needs, equipped with state-of-the-art tools, sensory-friendly spaces, and collaborative workstations where students of all abilities could learn together. As the ribbon was cut, the crowd burst into applause. Michael stood at Emma's side, clutching her hand tightly. "This is because of you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Emma squeezed his hand. "It's because of us," she corrected. "You were the reason we started, Michael. Your bravery showed everyone what needed to change." Mrs. Roberts approached them, her face glowing with pride. "Michael, I heard you've been helping some of the younger students with their projects. That's wonderful." Michael beamed. "It's fun. They ask a lot of questions, like I used to." Mrs. Roberts chuckled. "I think you're a natural mentor." The comment sparked an idea in Emma's mind. Later that evening, she sat down with Michael at the dining table. "How would you feel about starting a club for kids who need extra help?" she asked. Michael tilted his head, intrigued. "Like a helpers club?" "Exactly," Emma said. "You could help kids with their homework, talk to them about what's hard for them, and show them they're not alone." Michael's eyes lit up. "I'd love that. Can we call it Michael's Helpers?" Emma laughed. "Perfect. Let's do it." As summer gave way to fall, Michael's Helpers became a staple at the school. Students flocked to the after-school program, where Michael and a group of volunteers offered tutoring, emotional support, and a safe space to talk about their challenges. The club's success caught the attention of local media, and soon, other schools began replicating the model. Emma watched with pride as her brother flourished in his role as a mentor. The boy who had once been too scared to speak up now stood at the front of the room, leading discussions and offering encouragement. "I used to feel like I didn't belong," Michael told the group during one meeting. "But then I realized we all have something special to share. We just need people to see it." Meanwhile, Emma's advocacy work continued to grow. At the Education Reform Conference, her presentation was met with a standing ovation. She shared the story of Michael's struggles and the systemic failures that had allowed his mistreatment to occur. But she also highlighted the transformative changes their district had made and the power of community-driven solutions. Her words resonated deeply with the audience, many of whom were educators, policymakers, and advocates. After the presentation, Emma was inundated with requests for interviews, partnerships, and speaking engagements. One attendee, a state senator, approached her with a proposition. "Your story is exactly what we need to push forward new legislation on inclusive education," he said. "Would you be willing to testify at the state assembly?" Emma hesitated. The thought of speaking in front of lawmakers was intimidating, but she knew this was an opportunity to create lasting change. "I'd be honored," she said, her voice steady. In the weeks leading up to her testimony, Emma worked closely with disability rights organizations to craft her statement. She pored over statistics, case studies, and personal accounts, determined to present a compelling case for reform. On the day of the hearing, she stood before the assembly, her palms sweaty, but her resolve unshakable. "Good morning," she began, her voice echoing through the chamber. "My name is Emma Roberts, and I'm here to speak for every child who has ever felt invisible in their own classroom." She recounted Michael's journey, the abuses he had endured, and the grassroots efforts that had sparked change in their community. She concluded with a call to action. "Inclusion is not a privilege, it is a right. And it is our responsibility to ensure that right is upheld in every school across this state." The room erupted in applause as she stepped down from the podium. Lawmakers approached her, promising to support the proposed legislation. The experience left Emma feeling both empowered and humbled. She realized that her voice, and Michael's, had the power to drive real change. Back at school, Michael's confidence continued to soar. He participated in the annual science fair, presenting a new project, a model of an inclusive classroom. His display featured diverse representations of students and teachers, each working together to create a supportive environment. When he won first prize, the auditorium erupted in cheers. Emma watched from the audience, tears streaming down her face. Michael had come so far, and she couldn't wait to see what he would accomplish next. By the end of the school year, the district had implemented sweeping reforms. Teachers reported feeling more equipped to support their students, and families expressed gratitude for the newfound sense of inclusion. The changes had rippled outward, inspiring other districts to follow suit. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Michael looked around the table with a thoughtful expression. "Do you think we'll ever stop fighting?" he asked. Emma smiled, reaching for his hand. "Maybe not fighting, but we'll always be working to make things better. That's how change happens." Michael nodded, a determined glint in his eye. "I want to keep helping, not just here, but everywhere." Emma's chest swelled with pride. "You will, Michael. You already are." Years later, Emma looked back on their journey with awe. Michael had grown into a confident, compassionate young man, his passion for helping others guiding him into a career in education. Michael's helpers had expanded into a statewide program, and Emma's advocacy work had led to the passage of landmark legislation, ensuring greater protections and resources for students with disabilities. Their story had become a symbol of resilience and the power of community, a reminder that even in the face of adversity, change was possible when people came together. As Emma stood in the audience at Michael's college graduation, watching him accept his degree in education, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Their fight had been long and arduous, but it had been worth every step. Together, they had built a legacy that would continue to inspire generations to come. A new dawn of advocacy and leadership. The summer sun was high in the sky, casting a golden glow over the crowded university auditorium. The seats were filled with students, professors, and proud families as the graduating class of future educators lined up to receive their diplomas. Among them stood Michael, wearing a cap and gown that seemed too large for his slight frame, but fit perfectly with the confidence he exuded. Emma sat in the front row, flanked by their parents and Mrs. Roberts, who had become a close family friend over the years. Tears welled in Emma's eyes as she watched Michael approach the stage. When his name was called, the room erupted in applause, louder than it had been for any other graduate. Michael paused at the podium after accepting his diploma, glancing at the sea of faces before him. The dean had invited him to give a short speech, and as he adjusted the microphone, the room fell silent. "When I was 10, Michael began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I didn't think I'd ever make it to high school, let alone college. Back then, I thought school wasn't a place for kids like me, kids who learn differently, who needed a little more time, a little more patience, but I was wrong." He smiled, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on Emma. "I'm here today because of the people who believed in me, my family, my teachers, and my community. They didn't just see my struggles, they saw my potential. And now, it's my turn to do the same for others." The applause was deafening as Michael stepped down, his smile radiant. Emma felt an overwhelming surge of pride. Michael had not only overcome unimaginable obstacles, he had turned his experiences into a mission to make the world a better place. In the months that followed his graduation, Michael returned to his hometown, ready to begin his career as a teacher. He was hired at Lincoln Elementary, the very school where his journey had begun. Walking through the familiar halls on his first day as a teacher, Michael felt a mix of nostalgia and determination. This time, he was here not as a frightened child, but as a confident educator ready to make a difference. His classroom was a reflection of his vision for inclusive education. The walls were adorned with vibrant posters celebrating diversity and growth, and the shelves were stocked with books and tools for all learning styles. At the center of the room was a large rug with the words, "Everyone belongs," stitched in bold letters. Meanwhile, Emma had also continued her advocacy work, which had grown into a full-time endeavor. She had founded a nonprofit organization, Voices for Change, dedicated to supporting families, training educators, and advocating for systemic reforms in education. Her tireless efforts had taken her to conferences, legislative hearings, and schools across the country. One day, while Michael was preparing a lesson plan, he received a call from Emma. "I need you to come to the state capitol next week," she said, her voice brimming with excitement. Michael frowned. Why? What's happening? The governor is signing a new education reform bill, she explained. It includes provisions we fought for: mandatory inclusive education training, increased funding for special education, and penalties for schools that fail to meet standards. And they want you to be there when it's signed. Michael was stunned. Me? Why me? Because you're the reason we started this, Emma said gently. Your story is proof of why this matters. The day of the bill signing was a momentous occasion. The steps of the state capitol were crowded with reporters, advocates, and families whose lives would be forever changed by the new legislation. Michael stood beside Emma as the governor approached the podium. This bill represents a promise, the governor said. A promise that every child, regardless of their abilities or challenges, will have access to an education that meets their needs. Today, we honor that promise and the individuals who made it possible. The governor gestured to Michael and Emma. Michael Roberts, your courage to share your story has inspired countless others. And Emma Roberts, your relentless advocacy has been the driving force behind this change. On behalf of our state, thank you. Michael's cheeks flushed as the crowd applauded. He glanced at Emma, who gave him a reassuring smile. Together, they had accomplished something extraordinary. Back at Lincoln Elementary, Michael's classroom became a model for inclusive education. He used his experiences to create innovative teaching strategies that celebrated the strengths of every student. When one of his students, a boy named Ethan, struggled with reading, Michael saw a reflection of his younger self. Instead of pressuring Ethan to keep pace with his peers, Michael introduced him to audiobooks and helped him create a personalized learning plan. Over time, Ethan's confidence grew, and he began volunteering to read aloud in class. Watching Ethan's transformation reminded Michael of the power of patience and understanding. Word of Michael's success spread, and educators from other schools began visiting his classroom to learn from his methods. He collaborated with Emma and Voices for Change to develop training workshops, ensuring that teachers across the state had the tools they needed to support diverse learners. Years passed, and the Roberts family's impact only deepened. Michael's Helpers, the after-school program he had started as a teenager, expanded into a nationwide initiative. Emma's nonprofit grew into an international organization, advocating for educational equity in countries around the world. One evening, as Michael and Emma sat on the porch of their childhood home, watching the sun set over the neighborhood, Michael turned to her. "Did you ever think we'd get this far?" Emma laughed. "Honestly, no. But I'm glad we did." Michael nodded, a contemplative look in his eyes. "Do you think it's enough? All the changes we've made?" Emma reached over to squeeze his hand. "It's a start, but there's always more to do, and as long as we're willing to fight, things will keep getting better." Michael smiled, his heart full of gratitude for the journey that had brought them here. Together, they had transformed pain into purpose, building a legacy that would continue to shape the future of education. The stars began to twinkle overhead, and Michael leaned back in his chair, a sense of peace washing over him. He knew that their work wasn't done, but for the first time, he felt truly content. They had turned a moment of darkness into a lifetime of light, and the world was brighter because of it.